So I just finished watching the mini-series version of Catch 22, which the phrase Catch 22 has become a colloquial expression since the publishing of the novel. Of course, Catch 22 is where there's something where you can make either choice, but the outcome will be the same for almost paradoxical reasons. And the original Catch 22 comes from the fact that the main character is aircrew, bombardier, flying combat missions in World War II over Italy, and he doesn't want to do it no more. He is afraid of getting killed. He wants out. And so he asks, what about if he were crazy? Would he get out of flying combat missions? And the doctor tells him, yes, if you're crazy, you will be grounded and no longer allowed to fly combat missions. Therefore, you wouldn't have to. He said, but to be certified as being crazy, you have to ask to be certified as being crazy. And you have to ask to be pulled from combat duties. But if you do ask to be pulled from combat duties, that will be taken as evidence that you're actually sane. Because a sane, rational person wouldn't want to do that because there's a very high probability of dying. So the conundrum, the catch-22, is if you're sane, you won't want to fly, and you'll ask them to ground you and tell them you're crazy, but that will mean that you're sane, and therefore you have to keep flying. But if you're crazy, then you won't ask them, and they won't ground you, and you'll keep flying. So either way, you're going to keep flying combat missions, whether you're crazy or not. The only difference is whether or not you want to. And so I sort of live that in reverse, don't I? I'm crazy, so there's no way they're going to let me fly a military aircraft. The only way they would let me is if I got sane. But if I were sane, I wouldn't want to do it anymore. So it's the same idea, but with the opposite outcome. That's in some ways also applies in this strange, torturous way to various aspects of my life where it's like every time I start genuinely thinking I'm just crazy and, you know, I'm worried about all these things that probably aren't really going to happen, and I stop thinking these things are going to happen, then almost immediately something will happen to indicate that I was right. And every time I get convinced that I actually know exactly what's going on and I'm not crazy at all, then nothing happens. And it turns out I was wrong. And then I start to think I'm just crazy. And then something will happen. And it's kind of torture. It just never ends. Especially with this constant obsession I have with the possibility that China and India will go to war. Like I said my whole ramble about it, convinced that I was right. Then the next day nothing happened, even though I was sure it was imminent. And so I decided that, wow, I am crazy. That was stupid. And then the day after that, I woke up and there was another incident. It's horrible. But hey, Maybe I'm saving the world one day at a time, as long as I stay crazy and convince myself it's going to happen, and then it won't happen. On the other hand, if I ever finally decide to move on and forget about it, that's when it'll happen. And obviously, the fact that I'm saying this, observing it, and believe it means that currently I'm on the side of thinking it's going to happen. Then again, I'm bringing up this whole paradox, aren't I? So it just never ends. Not to mention, I should say, you know, my mental health is just generally in the shitter and always is. All through grad school, I was incredibly depressed, barely made it through the day, developed a pretty seriously unhealthy weed habit, and then I finally got sober. And I was like, okay, now I no longer smoke weed. I can apply for employment with, you know, well, I guess a federal contractor. And I did, pass the drug test. So now I was like, okay, I spent like a solid 6 months there being sober. And then I started working again. And I was like, well, actually, existence is kind of terrible after all. And so then I just decided to pick up drinking. Delicious and horrible for you. Doesn't make me as crazy. Actually, it reduces my level of insanity a little. Well, no, it doesn't. But it doesn't exacerbate it like weed does. What it does have is a bunch of much worse physical health effects. But anyways, yeah, it turns out, you know, when I actually have to work, no, I really can't make it through a week unless as soon as I get home, I get to have some sort of substance to make me feel better. And I just have no goddamn willpower, which is why I'm not really qualified to do something like be a fighter pilot, or being realistic. I just can't accept that because that dream is keeps me alive, even though it's a shitty dream. What's the point of any of this? I'd say I'm astonished they haven't fired me because actually of how lazy I am at work. But one, as a result of the pandemic, everybody's productivity is kind of low, and there's nobody in my office. And even though I honestly spend about half my day in my office just staring at the screen, doing nothing, occasionally browsing Reddit, I get maybe like 2 or 3 hours worth of work done in any given day, though. It's not too bad, I guess. But still, I can barely handle it. And that's despite having work that I consider to be reasonably interesting. I'm just lazy and weak, and I don't really have what it takes to do any of the things I ever dreamed of. I thought I was going to be world-renowned scientist, then I thought maybe I'd be a fighter pilot, fly with the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels. Then I went back to thinking I'd be a world-renowned scientist. Then a couple times maybe I thought maybe I'd be an author. I just thought I would do something great. And then I even settled out of that and I said, okay, that's not happening. But that was never a healthy pursuit. And I said, you know, maybe I'll just have some personal, normal, happy life where I make a contribution to science and I just have an otherwise nice, happy, balanced life. That ain't happening either. I will have made a contribution, but I'm only going to stay in this job until they finally well, they won't fire me, but at a certain point they won't renew my contract because I don't really get that much done. I don't know. I have all the privileges in the world. I'm just kind of a piece of shit. And everything I've done over the years to be like, Erica, kick yourself in the butt, get it together. It's not that I haven't gotten anything done, but I never get it together. I still stay me. I continue to stumble from one step of life to the next, barely hanging on, always dependent on something. That's just not good for you. I don't know. I hate myself.